But there's a second reason, a special sort of embarrassment suffered only by liberals. The African-American thinker, writer, and social scientist calls it white guilt, and he says it originated with a sense of shame that white Americans felt towards black Americans in the history of slavery and racial segregation. And that special sort of embarrassment is not limited only to black Americans, but it has gone over to all peoples of color. And it justifies often development aid. But what is remarkable about this type of insecurity or embarrassment is the inability of modern-day liberals to defend, let alone propagate to non-whites, the ideas, principles, and institutions that helped abolish slave trade, that liberated women and ended white colonialism. So it's not satisfactory, but it is one of the explanations, and I have met people who suffer it. Then the third explanation is one given by Paul Berman, another American thinker, who tried to explain why celebrated intellectuals, perfectly capable of outing the horrors and moral shortcomings of communism, got all jittery when analyzing Islam. Obviously, he was referring to Ian Buruma and Timothy Garton Ash, who called me an Enlightenment fundamentalist while spending a lot of time defending a creep like Tariq Ramadan. So right now, in our time, dear atheists, dear unbelievers, in Western societies, it is remarkable that it is conservatives and Christians who lead the way in defending such issues as free speech and the rights of Muslim women and the right of Israel to take appropriate measures in dealing with nuclear war. I started with the case of Fatima Abdallah, the woman who was beaten to death and whose case is closed under suicide. It is a Christian group who has taken on her case. They have raised money to try and reopen the case and have failed, but at least on the record, it is a Christian group who have taken it up for her. So what can an atheist alliance do for secular men and women in the Arab and Muslim world at large in general, and for ex-Muslims in Europe and in North America, and Australia and New Zealand, of course? Three things. The first is to develop a secular, liberal narrative that can compete and counter the Islamist doctrine and mythology. The second is a guide to organization. Secular Muslims are very weak at building institutions, and they need help there. Institutions based on this liberal narrative that function. And finally, political and policy training. Organization and mobilization are, of course, key, but the craft of governing is indispensable once you win elections. We have to take this burgeoning movement. I was told there are 4,000 atheists today who have come to this conference. In 2010, the Atheist Alliance brought together 2,500. In the United States, that was 10,000. So you can see that this is a large and growing demography. But we have to take this from being simply a place where we gather and listen to academics and comedy. We must defeat radical Islam and other religious and totalitarian ideologies that threaten our thinking, and we must do that while thinking and laughing. Infidel was the epithet, an insult that was thrown at me over and over again by family and former Muslim friends. It is a label that I now wear with pride and joy. Let's bring out a toast to reason. And if there's any time, I'll take your questions.
I think we have a little time for a few questions if there are people in the audience who wish to have a question. Yes. We have one over here.
I'd like to congratulate Ayaan on her courage, and she has an amazing history of being so brave in face of all cruelty in the Muslim world. I have been supported by the same organization when you were studying in the Netherlands, the UAF, and I just want to ask you one thing. When I'm from the Middle East, when I go back, it's like time travel. The mentality and the belief in conspiracy theories is so strong. Even with the point you mentioned, I'm not that optimistic that they will make a progress in the next decade or two. It might take another 500 years. What do you think?
I don't think it will take another 500 years. I don't think we should let it take another 500 years. I do understand the conspiracy theories. You have to consider that if you live under an autocracy where there's no freedom of speech, where there's no freedom of conscience, where children from the time they're able to go to school are fed only into state propaganda and Islamist propaganda, and both propagandas reinforce one another in conspiracy theories. Things are never resolved through critical thinking and reason. Things are blamed on outsiders, on Satan, on the Jews, on America, etc. So if you have generations who grow up in that kind of environment, then it's not surprising that they believe in conspiracy theories and that they're susceptible to victimhood and to, blaming outsiders. But despite that, I see individuals and groups, a growing number of them, who are questioning not only states, the autocratic states that they live under, but they have started also questioning the demand to submit to a God, and that submission means that some people are in power and others are not. And you see a young demographic that is probably not as informed and as educated as individuals who grow up in a liberal society, but who are really hungry for freedom. Hamza Kashgari, whom I mentioned, can you imagine the odds of growing up in Saudi Arabia and coming to the conclusions that he has? That should give you confidence, and not only confidence that these people exist, but if you have any charitable traits in you, that is where our charity should be going, in expanding that group of people and helping them along. Yeah.
We have time for one more question up the top there.
Fundamental Christians and Zionists believe that Israel is chosen by God to steal Palestinian land. The West turns a blind eye to Israel's continuing violations of international law, while the US pumps $5 billion a year into its economy. Do you think this is the best way for the West to make friends and influence people in the Islamic world?
Israelis, please read the Haaretz or the Jerusalem Post, are the first ones to condemn religious fanaticism within Israel. I was reading an article this afternoon. I was reading an article this afternoon in the Haaretz that said that it wasn't only Islamic fundamentalism, but Jewish fundamentalism that was a threat to Israel. I live in the United States of America, and if you read the newspapers and you go around, you will see that there is a great deal of criticism on American policy towards Israel, not least of all by Jews. My point is, things in Israel and between the Israelis and the Palestinians can be improved and should be improved. But it's no excuse for Tunisians, for Egyptians, for Pakistanis and Indonesians who are not even neighbors of Israel. It's no excuse for the entire Muslim Ummah of 1.57 billion people to blame Israel for the shortcomings of Islam. That is irrational, and you must agree with me in a conference where we've come to celebrate reason.
That's all we have time for. Thank you once again, Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
This is Big Ideas from the ABC.